I still remember the exact moment it began. She looked me right in the eye, all smiles, and said, "I'm bringing my entire family for Thanksgiving, just 25 people." I smiled back and replied, "Perfect." I booked a trip. Now, before I get ahead of myself, let me stop here for a moment. My name is Judith, though most people just call me Judy, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. I always like to know where folks are watching from, so tell me in the comments. Are you from a small town like me, or do you live in a busy city? I find it amazing how stories like mine reach people in every corner of the world. All right, now let me take you back a bit, so you can understand how we got here. I'm in my 70s, retired for many years now, and for the most part, I enjoy a quiet, simple life. My days are filled with the things I love: gardening, reading, knitting, and long walks in the park with my dog, Daisy. I've worked hard all my life, raised a family, and like most women my age, I've carried more than my share of responsibility over the years. These days, all I ask for is peace and respect. Thanksgiving, for me, has always been a warm, modest holiday. Nothing extravagant, nothing over the top. Just a table set with care, a roasted turkey, a couple of family recipes handed down from my mother, and the company of my son and his family. I never needed a house full of people, and I never wanted to put on some grand show. I believe in quality over quantity. One heartfelt meal with loved ones beats a crowded room of people who barely know each other. But that philosophy isn't exactly shared by my daughter-in-law. Now let me tell you about her. Her name isn't important. You'll see why soon enough. But what you do need to know is that she thrives on appearances. She loves big gestures, dramatic statements, and being the center of attention. Everything in her world has to be bigger, better, and louder than anyone else's. And unfortunately, she often expects me to do the heavy lifting behind her ideas. When she and my son first married, I tried my best to welcome her warmly. I cooked meals, opened my home, offered help whenever I could. I thought we'd become close, but as time went on, it became clear that what she wanted wasn't a mother-in-law. What she wanted was someone to serve her. Every holiday turned into a performance where she made demands and I carried them out. It started small. One year she wanted me to bake an extra pie for her friends. The next year she wanted me to host at my house because hers was too small. Over time, her requests grew bolder. She never offered to help, never lifted a finger to clean up, and often had the nerve to criticize the way I seasoned my food or the way I set the table. I bit my tongue for years. You see, I was raised to keep the peace, to avoid making a scene, to let the younger generation take their way. I told myself, she's young, she'll grow out of it. But the truth is, she only grew more entitled. Still, I never imagined she'd go as far as she did last Thanksgiving. It was one of those crisp autumn evenings, leaves scattered on the lawn, the smell of chimney smoke in the air. We were gathered at my house for a Sunday dinner, a simple pot roast with vegetables. My son, my grandchildren, and of course my daughter-in-law were all at the table. We were chatting about school, about the weather, when suddenly, with a grin plastered on her face, she dropped her little announcement. "This year, Thanksgiving will be at your house, Judy. I'm bringing my entire family. Just 25 people. Don't worry. You'll handle it, just like that." As if I were her maid. As if I didn't have a choice. Now in the past, I might have sighed, nodded, and tried to figure out how to stretch my oven space to cook for a crowd that size. But something in me had shifted. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was wisdom. Maybe it was simply exhaustion. But I knew I wasn't about to let her treat me that way anymore. So I smiled, calmly, and said the words she least expected. "Perfect. I booked a trip. You cook and clean. I'm not a servant." The look on her face was priceless. For the first time in years, she didn't have a quick comeback. Her smile vanished, her jaw dropped, and she turned pale as the mashed potatoes sitting on the table. My son glanced back and forth between us, speechless, and in that silent moment, I knew something had changed forever. But little did she know, that was only the beginning. The real surprise was still to come. The table had gone completely still. You could hear the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My grandchildren had paused mid-bite, forks hovering over their plates, their eyes darting between their mother and me. My son kept his head down, suddenly very interested in his potatoes. My daughter-in-law, however, wasn't used to silence. She thrived on control, on getting her way, and she was certain she had spoken a decree that could not be challenged. Her voice was sugar-coated, but her words were sharp as knives. "So it's settled, then. Thanksgiving will be here at your house, Judy. My whole family will come over. Just 25 people. It'll be wonderful. You'll handle it." She said it as though she were doing me a favor, as though bringing 24 extra people into my home was some kind of gift. I looked at her, calm and steady, and repeated what I had already said. "Perfect. I booked a trip. You cook and clean. I'm not a servant." Her smile faltered. She blinked at me, as though she hadn't heard correctly. I beg your pardon?" she stammered, her voice higher than usual. I leaned back in my chair, folded my napkin neatly, and placed it beside my plate. My heart was beating fast, but my voice never wavered. "You heard me. You're welcome to host your family. But I won't be here to serve them. My days of slaving over a stove while you sit back and smile are over." The colour drained from her face. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "But that's not how we do things. Everyone expects you to host. It's tradition." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "Tradition? The only tradition here has been me working myself half to death while you waltz in and take credit. That's not a tradition, dear. That's bad manners?" she gasped, her hand flying to her chest as though I had struck her. My son finally looked up, caught between us like a referee in a match he wanted no part of. "Mom, maybe we can talk about this," he began, but I cut him off gently. "No, dear. There's nothing to talk about. I've made my decision. This year, I'm not cooking for 25 people. I'm not even cooking for 10. I'm going away, and I'll enjoy my holiday in peace. It's time your wife takes responsibility for her own family." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My daughter-in-law's face turned bright red, then pale again. She looked around the table, seeking support, but none came. Even the children, sensing the tension, stayed quiet. Finally, she let out a sharp little laugh, the kind people give when they're trying to cover their embarrassment. "You can't be serious, Judy. You can't just walk away from Thanksgiving. What will people think?" I met her gaze without blinking. "They'll think that I finally stood up for myself. They'll think it's about time you learned that hospitality is not slavery. And frankly, I don't much care what they think." Her lips trembled. She picked up her water glass and set it down again, the ice clinking against the sides. "You can't do this to me," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied softly but firmly. "I'm simply refusing to let you do it to me." For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with shock. My son cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable, but even he couldn't find the words to defend her. He knew I was right. Deep down, he'd known it for years. At last, my daughter-in-law pushed back her chair and stood. She smoothed her blouse, trying to regain some dignity, but her hands were shaking. "Fine. If that's how you feel, then so be it. But don't think this won't have consequences." Her voice cracked at the end, and without another word, she stormed out of the dining room. My son hesitated, torn, then followed after her, leaving the children behind with me. The little ones looked at me, wide-eyed and uncertain. I smiled at them gently, picking up the serving spoon. Eat your dinner, darlings. Everything's all right. But of course, everything wasn't all right. Not yet. That confrontation was only the beginning. Thanksgiving was still weeks away, and I knew my daughter-in-law well enough to understand she wasn't going to let this go. No, she would try again. She would scheme, manipulate, and push, just as she always had. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had already started preparing for her next move. And this time, I wasn't just going to say no. This time, I was going to teach her a lesson she would never forget. After that dinner, the house felt strangely quiet. My grandchildren went back to eating, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. Children have a way of sensing when something important has shifted, even if they don't fully understand it. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and let the silence sink in. My heart was still pounding from the confrontation, but beneath it was something stronger, a sense of relief. For the first time in years, I had spoken the truth out loud. You see, this didn't come out of nowhere. No, this had been building for a very long time. Let me take you back a few Thanksgivings. When my son first married her, I was hopeful. I truly wanted to love her like a daughter. I told myself, she's young, she just needs time to grow into the role of wife and mother. And I did everything I could to make her feel welcome. I remember one of the first holidays after their wedding. I spent 3 full days preparing, shopping, cooking, baking. I polished the silver, ironed the tablecloth, even made her favorite dessert from scratch. When she arrived, she walked through the door, glanced around and said, I suppose it'll do. No thank you. No smile. Just criticism. The next year, it was worse. She invited half a dozen of her cousins without asking me first. I only found out when they showed up at the door with bottles of wine and store-bought pies, expecting to be fed. I scrambled to set extra places at the table, stretching the food I'd made, while she laughed and told everyone, "Oh, Judy always makes plenty, don't worry." By the end of that night, I was on my feet for 12 hours, washing dishes long after everyone had gone home. She never once offered to help, and it didn't stop at Thanksgiving. Christmas, Easter, even birthdays. It was always the same story. She wanted to play hostess in front of her friends and relatives, but the actual work, that fell on me. I can't count the number of times she handed me her coat at the door without so much as a word, as though I were the hired help, or the times she made little digs about my cooking, too dry, too salty, too plain, while piling her plate high. For years, I held my tongue. Why? Because I loved my son, and I didn't want to cause friction in his marriage. Because I adored my grandchildren, and I didn't want to put them in the middle of a family feud. Because I was raised in a time when women were taught to smile and endure. But let me tell you something. Even the most patient heart has its limit. And that night, when she stood in my dining room and declared that 25 people would descend on my house for Thanksgiving, as though my home were some banquet hall, I knew I had reached mine. It wasn't just the number of people. It was the entitlement in her voice, the assumption that I had no choice. She didn't ask. She didn't suggest. She announced, as if I were a servant waiting for orders. That was the moment I realized something important. She would never change. Not unless I made her. And so, instead of backing down, instead of sighing and agreeing as I always had, I looked her straight in the eye and told her the truth. I wasn't her servant. I wasn't her doormat. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. But don't think for a moment that it was easy. My hands were trembling under the tablecloth when I said it. My throat felt tight. My voice wanted to shake. But I held firm, because I knew if I gave in one more time, I'd be giving in forever. The days that followed were uneasy. My son called a few times, trying to smooth things over, but he didn't press me. He knew better. My daughter-in-law, however, stayed silent, which only meant one thing. She was plotting, and I knew her well enough to guess she wouldn't go quietly. What she didn't know, what gave me a secret smile every night before I went to bed, was that I had already started planning my own move. This Thanksgiving wasn't just going to be different. It was going to be unforgettable. The week after that dinner felt like walking on thin ice. I knew my daughter-in-law wouldn't let things rest. She was too proud, too determined to have her way. And sure enough, it wasn't long before she showed up at my door, wearing her sweetest smile, the kind of smile that hides daggers. I had just set a pot of tea to boil when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, there she was, standing in her tailored coat with a tin of cookies in her hands. She'd never brought me anything before. "Judy," she said, all honey and light. "I thought I'd drop these off for you. Just a little treat." I raised an eyebrow but let her in. She made herself comfortable on my sofa, setting the tin down on the coffee table and crossed her legs. She was clearly on a mission. "Listen," she began, clasping her hands dramatically, "about the other night. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Thanksgiving is such an important tradition for our family. Everyone expects you to host. It's just what we do. You wouldn't want to disappoint them, would you?" Her voice dripped with guilt. I stirred the sugar into my tea slowly, taking my time before I answered. "I didn't misunderstand a thing," I said evenly. "You announced that 25 people would be showing up at my house without asking, without offering to help. And I told you the truth. I won't be hosting. I'm not a servant." Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, Judy," she said, tilting her head in mock sympathy. "You're overreacting. It's just one day of work. Surely you can manage it. You always do." I set my teacup down and looked her straight in the eye. "Yes, I always do. And you always take advantage of that. You call it tradition. I call it using me. That ends this year." Her lips tightened. She leaned forward, lowering her voice as though she could persuade me with secrecy. "If you don't host, it will be humiliating for me. My whole family will think I can't manage. Do you want that? Do you want them judging me?" I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Oh, dear. If you can't manage, perhaps it's because you've never tried. Maybe it's time you showed them what you're capable of, on your own." Her eyes narrowed, the sweetness slipping away. "You'd really let me fail like that? You'd let me stand in front of everyone looking like a fool?" I leaned back in my chair, calm as still water. "I don't have to let you fail. You've done that to yourself, year after year, by never lifting a finger. If your family judges you, it will be for your own choices, not mine." The kettle whistled in the kitchen, sharp and shrill, cutting through the tension. I rose to pour another cup of tea, deliberately turning my back to her. It gave me a moment to breathe, to steady myself. When I returned, I set the teapot down between us, the steam rising like a curtain. She was glaring now, the pretense of sweetness gone. "This isn't fair, Judy. You're putting me in an impossible position." I sat down slowly and gave her a small, knowing smile. "No, I'm simply refusing to put myself in one. That's the difference." For a long moment, she said nothing. She stared at me as though I were a stranger she didn't recognize, as though she couldn't believe I was the same woman who had once bent to her every demand. Finally, she stood abruptly, snatching her purse from the sofa. "Fine. If you won't help, then don't expect me to forget this. There will be consequences." I watched her storm out the door, her heels clicking against the floor like drum beats. When the door shut behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I knew she meant what she said. There would be consequences. She would plot, scheme, and do everything in her power to put the blame back on me. But what she didn't know was that I had already planned for this. You see, I hadn't just told her no. I had made arrangements. arrangements that would ensure that when Thanksgiving came, she would be the one standing in the spotlight, and not the flattering kind. I smiled to myself as I sipped my tea. For years, I had played the role of the accommodating hostess, the quiet mother-in-law who never spoke up. But now the roles had shifted. This time she would learn a lesson she'd never forget, and it would all unfold in front of her entire family. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of autumn day that makes the leaves look like stained glass in the sunlight. But inside my house, things were different. There was no turkey roasting in the oven, no scent of pies cooling on the counter, no frantic bustle of dishes and pots. Instead, there was calm. My suitcase was packed, standing by the door. I had my coat laid out, my purse ready, and Daisy's leash draped over the chair. I had a plan, and for once, it didn't involve being chained to the kitchen. Around noon, I heard it. A chorus of voices, laughter, the sound of cars pulling up outside. One after another, doors slammed, feet crunched over the driveway, and soon enough, my daughter-in-law's voice rang out, bright and commanding. "Here we are! Everyone, come in. Judy will have everything ready." I stood at the doorway, calm and steady, and opened it before they could knock. A wave of faces greeted me. Her parents, her siblings, cousins, nieces, nephews, all dressed for the occasion, carrying bottles of wine and trays of store-bought appetizers. And there she was, at the front of the group, smiling like a queen entering her castle. But her smile faltered the moment she saw me. I wasn't in an apron. I wasn't bustling around with a tray in my hands. I was standing tall, suitcase at my side, coat draped over my arm. What is this?" she stammered, her eyes darting to the empty dining table behind me. I returned her smile with one of my own, calm and polite. "Welcome, but you won't be eating here today." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her mother frowned, her sister exchanged glances with her husband, and even the children looked confused. My daughter-in-law's cheeks flushed crimson. "What are you talking about, Judy? This is Thanksgiving." "Yes, it is," I said softly. "And as I told you before, I am not hosting. I am not cooking. I am not cleaning. I'm going on vacation." Her jaw dropped. She turned to her family, her voice rising. "She can't be serious. She's joking, right?" But the look on my face told them I wasn't joking. I picked up my suitcase and stepped aside. "You're welcome to use the house if you'd like, but there's nothing prepared. No turkey, no stuffing, no pie. This year, if you want a Thanksgiving feast, it will have to come from you." A murmur spread through the crowd. Her uncle cleared his throat uncomfortably. Her aunt whispered something under her breath. My daughter-in-law's smile had vanished completely now, replaced with a look of sheer panic. "But you can't just abandon us like this," she cried, her voice trembling. "What will everyone think?" I looked around at her family, meeting their eyes one by one. "They'll think it's time you stepped up. They'll think it's time you carried your own weight. For years, I've done the work while you've taken the credit. Not anymore?" She sputtered, pointing at me as though trying to rally support. "Do you hear this? She's refusing us on Thanksgiving. Who does that?" Her father shifted uncomfortably. "Well, she did tell you, didn't she?" he muttered. Her mother frowned but said nothing. And then, to everyone's surprise, my son finally spoke. "She's right," he said quietly but firmly. "Mum has been doing everything for years. It's time we handled things ourselves." The silence that followed was heavier than any before. My daughter-in-law spun around to stare at him, betrayal written all over her face. "You're taking her side?" she hissed. "I'm taking the side of common sense," he replied. "Mum deserves a break. We'll manage." I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. For once, he had found his voice. My daughter-in-law's face twisted with anger, but before she could retort, the rumble of a van pulling into the driveway interrupted us. Everyone turned to look as a catering truck pulled up, the driver hopping out with trays and boxes stacked high. Her eyes widened. What? What is this? I folded my hands calmly. That's the meal you wanted. Delivered straight to your home. I made the arrangements in advance. Everything you need is there: turkey, stuffing, pie. You'll host your family, just as you planned. Only this time, you'll do it in your own house. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her relatives began chuckling, some even clapping me on the shoulder as they headed back toward their cars. "Come on, then," her brother said cheerfully. "Looks like we're eating at your place instead." One by one, they began filing back to their cars, leaving her standing in my doorway, speechless, her face burning with humiliation. I picked up Daisy's leash, gave her a polite nod, and said softly, "Happy Thanksgiving, dear. Enjoy hosting. I'll send you a postcard." And with that, I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, suitcase in hand, the weight of years of resentment finally lifting off my shoulders. But the day wasn't over yet. The real twist was still to come. As I walked down the driveway with Daisy at my side and my suitcase rolling behind me, I couldn't help but glance back once. My daughter-in-law was still frozen in the doorway, her arms stiff at her sides, her eyes darting from me to her family, who were now piling back into their cars, chattering about the unexpected change of plans. It was a scene I'll never forget. Her painted smile cracked wide open, her voice caught in her throat, and the proud facade she'd built for years crumbling in front of 25 witnesses. For so long, she had strutted around, acting as if she held all the power. But on that day, her own family saw the truth. She wasn't in control at all. By the time I reached the corner of the street, she finally found her voice. I could hear her shrill protests echoing down the block. "This isn't fair." She tricked me. "Don't just stand there. Someone say something." But no one did. Instead, her relatives shuffled awkwardly into their cars, some shaking their heads, others stifling laughs. Her brother called out, half joking, "Come on, let's see what she's got waiting for us at her place." "I'm starving." And just like that, the caravan of cars pulled away from my driveway, leaving her behind in a storm of humiliation. I checked into a little inn a few miles out of town. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a cozy place with a fireplace in the lobby and a kind woman at the front desk who greeted me as though I were family. I ordered a simple meal, nothing fancy, and ate in peace while Daisy snoozed at my feet. It was the most restful Thanksgiving I'd had in years. But of course, peace never lasts forever. The very next day, my phone began buzzing. Missed calls, voicemails, messages from my son, my daughter-in-law, even my grandchildren. I let them pile up before I finally sat down to listen. My daughter-in-law's voice was the first. "I hope you're proud of yourself, Judy. You embarrassed me in front of my entire family. They'll never forget it. Do you know what they're saying about me now? That I can't manage my own household? That I had to rely on you all these years? You humiliated me on purpose, and I won't forgive you for it." Click. Then came my son's message. His voice was softer, steadier. "Mom, I don't know what to say. She's furious, but honestly, part of me thinks you did the right thing. I should have stood up for you years ago. I'm sorry it had to come to this. The kids asked why you weren't there, and I didn't know what to tell them. Maybe when things calm down, we can talk." And then, the sweetest message of all, my granddaughter's tiny voice. "Grandma, Thanksgiving was weird without you. Mommy was mad, but Daddy said you needed a rest. I hope you're okay. I saved you a cookie." That message alone nearly brought me to tears. The fallout didn't stop with voicemails. Word got around quickly. Some of her relatives, those who had sat in my dining room year after year while I worked myself ragged, actually called me privately to say they understood. A few even admitted they admired me for finally putting my foot down. But my daughter-in-law? She wasn't about to back down gracefully. A few days later, she showed up at my house again. This time, there was no tin of cookies, no fake smile. Her arms were crossed, her jaw set, and her eyes burned with fury. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed as soon as I opened the door. "You think you've made some kind of point? But all you've done is drive a wedge into this family. My family will never respect me again, thanks to you." I stood calmly, hands folded, and let her finish. When she finally ran out of steam, I spoke. "Respect isn't something you demand, dear. It's something you earn. And maybe now you'll understand that it doesn't come from ordering people around. It comes from rolling up your sleeves and working alongside them." Her face twisted. But before she could respond, my son pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, his face tired, his shoulders slumped. "Enough," he said, looking at her. "Mum was right. We've all leaned on her too much. It's time we did our own share. And if that bothers you, then maybe you need to rethink how you treat people." For once, she had no answer. She turned on her heel, storming back to the car without another word. As I watched her drive away, my son lingered behind. He gave me a small smile, one filled with both guilt and gratitude. "Thanks, Mum," he said quietly, "for standing up, even when I couldn't." Maybe this was the only way she'd learn. I nodded, a swell of pride and relief washing over me. For years, I'd carried the weight of unspoken resentment. But now, the burden was gone. Thanksgiving had been turned upside down, yes. But in that chaos, something remarkable had happened. I had reclaimed my dignity, and slowly, my son was beginning to see it too. Still, I knew this wasn't the end, because when pride is wounded, it doesn't heal quickly, and my daughter-in-law's pride had been shattered in front of 25 people. The real test of how far she'd go, that was still to come. A week passed after that disastrous Thanksgiving, but the tension lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. I had returned from my little getaway rested and refreshed, but I knew my daughter-in-law wasn't finished with me. Women like her rarely let go of humiliation. They nurse it, feed it, and sharpen it into a weapon. Sure enough, I got the call. My son's voice on the other end was careful, measured. "Mum, she wants to have a family talk. She says we all need to clear the air. Would you come over for dessert this Sunday evening?" I could hear the strain in his voice, the way he tried to sound neutral. He wanted peace, but he also knew better than to push me. I considered it for a long moment before answering. "I'll be there," I said, "but tell her not to expect me empty-handed." On Sunday evening, I walked up to their doorstep carrying a large box. Inside was a chocolate cake layered with rich frosting, decorated with sugared cranberries. It wasn't just dessert. It was a symbol, a reminder that when I give, I do it out of love, not obligation. When my daughter-in-law opened the door, her expression froze. She hadn't expected me to show up looking so calm, with Daisy trotting at my side and a smile on my face. She certainly hadn't expected me to be carrying something so beautiful. "Judith?" she said stiffly. "Come in." The house was full again. Her parents, her siblings, the same relatives who had witnessed her humiliation days before. But this time, the mood was tense. Conversations hushed the moment I stepped into the room. All eyes turned toward me. I set the cake on the table, took off my coat, and stood tall. My voice was steady as I spoke. "Before we sit down, there are a few things I need to say, and I want everyone here to hear it." My daughter-in-law shifted uncomfortably, but I pressed on. "For years, I've opened my home and my kitchen because I love my family. I cooked, I cleaned, I hosted, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. But somewhere along the line, that kindness was mistaken for duty. I was treated like a servant instead of a mother, a grandmother. a woman who deserves respect. I looked directly at her, holding her gaze. Last week, that ended. And let me be clear, it's not because I don't love family, but because I love myself enough not to be used anymore. The room was silent, the weight of my words settling over them like a heavy quilt. My son lowered his head, his cheeks pink, but I could see the relief in his eyes. My daughter-in-law's lips tightened, but I didn't give her a chance to interrupt. Tradition doesn't mean one person shoulders the work while everyone else takes credit. Tradition is about sharing, sharing food, sharing effort, sharing joy. If you want Thanksgiving or Christmas or any holiday to be meaningful, then it has to come from all of us. Together, her sister spoke up timidly from the corner. She's right, you know. We've all leaned on her without thinking. Maybe it's time we all pitched in. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. My daughter-in-law's face paled. She hadn't expected her own family to turn against her. She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand. Well, maybe we all got carried away. It's just, Judy does everything so well. We've come to depend on her, I smiled politely. Dependence isn't respect. And I won't accept one without the other. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, my son stood. His voice was quiet, but resolute. Mum's right. From now on, we're going to do this differently. Next year, it's a potluck. Everyone brings something. Everyone helps. No exceptions. The room erupted in chatter, some voices protesting, others agreeing, but the decision was made. For the first time in years, the burden was no longer mine to carry. I cut the cake, passing slices around the table. My grandchildren's eyes lit up as they took their plates, and the tension in the room softened just a little. As I watched them eat, I leaned back in my chair and let out a quiet breath. The fight was over, not with shouting, but with clarity. And though my daughter-in-law sat stiffly at the far end of the table, her pride bruised beyond repair, even she knew the truth. She could no longer treat me as her servant. The power had shifted, and it wasn't going back. When I got home that night, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, and thought about everything that had happened. For years, I had allowed myself to be pushed into a corner, made to feel like my only value was in how much I could cook or clean. But that Thanksgiving changed everything. I realized something important. Respect isn't given freely to those who never demand it. You have to stand up for yourself, no matter your age, no matter how long it takes. And the older I get, the more I see that dignity is worth more than keeping the peace.